So if you haven't already, please grab some food. Please take out your CV or resume and job listing that you were asked to bring in, though we won't use them until later. And let's start with our opening discussion for today. So we're going to start with just our opening reflection before we get into the rest of the training. This is particularly about communication for career materials. So this is just a general opportunity to share what's come up for you around creating or coaching career materials. And if you've already coached, can I see a raise of hands? How many of you already had coaching sessions? Okay. Have any of you had coaching sessions around career materials? Okay. And if you want to share any questions that you have around coaching career materials, or sharing experiences or questions you've had around your particular coaching, I'd love to hear from you. And I think we would all like to hear from each other. So what's come up for people? Yes.
Um, I'll say that like I did a coaching appointment for someone's like master's thesis. And like a lot of the kind of basic things that we talked about, like as kind of what to look for, seemed like they were really helpful for this person,
Great.
kind of like orienting them. So I think like even if you don't have like a full plan of like this is how exactly we're going to like kind of get to it, just kind of leading them through like kind of the thinking and like examining of their own work will be really helpful because it's something that they haven't actually looked at.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you'll find this over and over again that the best skill that you can bring and the best asset that you can bring is your ability to ask questions and share your authentic experience when reviewing someone's materials. Hello. Okay, so we're going to come back to this at the end of the training and see if there's anything new that has come up for you. So to remind you where we're at, today we're focusing on CVs and resumes, and next time we'll be focusing on statements of purpose and research proposals. In particular, we'll be focusing on the NSF GRFP, which, if you're not aware, is undergoing some turmoil. There has yet to be an updated call for this year. We're going to focus on last year's because it's still the most comprehensive grant that has all these materials and examples and the same skills that you'll use for last year's, you'll use for this year's when that comes out, and similar grants. And then slides and posters in October, presentation skills and networking. Well, you'll get a chance to live present your hourglass that you've had a chance to work on. And then papers and theses next year. And then we'll finally end with workshop design, where if you're interested in giving a workshop, this will give you the skills for how to structure that workshop. So for today in particular, we hope that you'll be able to help your clients understand application processes and strategies, like the general skills, and then help them identify what those application material expectations are, help them tailor those materials to demonstrate that they're a qualified match and help them develop a personal brand. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what those two terms mean today. Help them make their application materials memorable through these star stories, and then help clients translate their experiences into transferable skills. Now, I want to start by saying that in general, the best resource for general application strategy is CAPD. They have a database of CVs and resumes and job calls. They can help with international job searches, help with mock interviews and negotiations, and help with job searching and networking for underrepresented minorities, women, LGBTQ. But for the best resource for discipline-specific application strategy, that is YAL, the CommLab. So you can really help people tailor their scientific expertise for industry-based work. And some departments also offer trainings in Chalk Talks. Can I just see a raise of hands? Do you know if your department offers Chalk Talk trainings or resources? Okay. So starting with general application strategy, a good rule of thumb is that it's better to customize just a few applications over sending out many generic ones. It doesn't mean that you can't send out many applications, but you have limited time and limited energy. So really focusing on sending out a few custom applications. And the best way to create a custom application is to start with a master CV or resume for easy reference. So can I just see a raise of hands? Who here already has a master CV or resume? Okay, yeah, yes to ish. So one of the ways that I was recommended to keep track of my master resume and update it was to keep track of all my events and details as much as possible in a calendar, like a Google Calendar. Then, depending on how meticulous you are, after the end of every month, 6 months, year, you can scan through your calendar and then just add to your master resume. The formatting doesn't matter. Word doc, it doesn't need to be all pretty through a LaTeX document. But the purpose is really easy reference to then quickly create custom application materials for a job application. And if you think you could use some updating, we have a CV and resume and headshot workshop coming up Monday, September 22nd, where you'll have some time to update your resume and or CV. There'll be some opportunity to coach each other on that. And then we have a professional photographer coming in. So signups are required for the headshots. She's already worked with us once. She does absolutely amazing headshots. So highly, highly recommend. And then once you have your custom or your master resume, you can then apply quickly once a job listing is posted, as quickly as possible. So you're not starting from scratch. And so you're applying quickly, although the hiring timeline can vary weeks to months in industry and months for academic positions. So after you submit your application, typically after the first round, there's a phone or video interview, likely a second round where there's an on-site or video interview. Usually the top candidate has a reference check, and then you get offered the job, and this is the time for negotiations, which are a very normal part of the process. They may feel scary, but they can become easier with practice. Can I also see a raise of hands? How many of you have ever negotiated when receiving any kind of offer? Yeah, it is something that happens. It's expected. It's almost weird if you don't do it, because this is really a time to think about what is that you value, what is it that you care about, and how are you going to be a good fit for the position and the position a good fit for you. And then it's your first day. So in creating these materials, we're going to follow the strategic communication guide, where instead of the generic audience, strategic goals, main message, and structure, who is going to be reading your materials? It's going to be the hiring committee. Why are you applying to get hired? And then specifically, the main message of your application materials will be to focus on your personal brand and qualified match, which we'll discuss in detail. And then you'll write about it using this star structure and visual hierarchy, which we'll go into more detail. So starting with the application strategy, it can help for your own applications and for your clients to first clarify what are your strategic goals. Now, to get hired is the most immediate goal, in which case there's questions like, why do you want this position and why are you a good match for this position? But then there's the longer term goals, like, what is your vision for the future? How is this career going to be progressed by this particular position? And how are you going to communicate that? There's your mission, which is your role in your vision. There's your experience, which is what you've already done or what you will do in your role. There's what has or will make you successful. And then there's the culture that you value along the way. This is a common pyramid that you might see in business development, but it can be used personally as well. And the first couple of times that I saw this, I thought, like, wasn't really sure what these meant. So I'm going to give you a specific example for myself, how I might fill this out with some bullet points. So in general, for my career, my vision for the future is a world where science communication connects science and society. There's two-way dialogue, there's trust. It's not just about scientists talking at people, but there's really a connection happening. And so my role in this, my mission, what I do is I train scientists in effective and empathetic communication. The experience that I have, what I've done, or what I will do in my role is I've already have experience training graduate researchers here and elsewhere. And in the future, I will be training industry researchers as well, kind of getting that as broad as possible. The skills that I have, I have a PhD minor in science communication, a PhD major in astronomy, and 10 years of experience. And the culture that I value are really other scientists and coaches who also value connection. And so these are going to be things that your client may not have really had the chance to think about yet or articulate that will be important when really highlighting why they're a good fit for a position. Then after the strategic why, there's more depth into who is going to be reading the application materials. And different organizations and positions require different main messages. So if they're applying to a startup, then that startup is going to be looking for people who enjoy fast-paced environments, who can tolerate uncertainty, who might be ready to take on multiple roles. Whereas a larger and more established organization will be looking for people who can work well within a structure, play a well-defined role. And so this is what the values are of the organizations that you or your client might be applying to. Similarly, in industry, whether you or your client are more interested in teaching on the one side and applying to a teaching-based college, or more research and applying to a technical institution, what they're going to be looking for is going to be different. And that's going to impact the main message. And so the best way to understand what they're looking for is to research as much as possible about the organization and the position. So what do they care about? What's their vision and mission? What kind of projects do they have? What are their needs and what are their culture? And you can start just by doing a web search. And then you can start to activate your network. So this is thinking about anyone that you know in a similar position. Who might have you met at a conference? Do you know anyone on LinkedIn? Do you know anyone who knows anyone on LinkedIn? And this is really something to build before you need it. And this is ultimately what we mean by building a network. And networking is just getting to know people and what they do so that you can have these conversations, as you go and support each other. Once you activate your network, this is the opportunity for informational interviews. Can I see a raise of hands if you've ever asked for an informational interview? Okay. Can I see a raise of hands if you've ever been asked for an informational interview? Okay. So an informational interview is a very normal part of the career process where once you have someone in your network that you can identify, you contact them and say, hi, I'm interested in what you're doing. Could we chat for 15, 30 minutes and just ask some general questions about, how they've been successful, any questions that you might have, because ultimately at some point people will be contacting you to ask for informational interviews. The time to do this is not like right before a job when you're applying for a job, someone who works at the company, like interviewing them. It's less targeted and it's more just, building your sense of what's out there, what have people done, how have they been successful, and then giving that back in return. And sometimes you can find out who's going to read the application. Sometimes it's just a matter of reaching out to a position and asking, who can I address the cover letter to? Or maybe someone in your network already knows the answer to this. And then where you and the organization intersect ultimately shows how you are this qualified match for the position. This is what you're going to focus your application materials on. And this qualified match defines your personal brand. It's your main message, which is going to be represented across your application. And the point of your personal brand or the main message of you is so that when a hiring committee is glancing at your CV, your cover letter, or your application packet, and they're talking to each other, they can say, oh yeah, I like the applicant who, fill in the blank. So what do you want them to say or think or remember when they fill in that blank? Then with that main message defined, you can make your application memorable with keywords. And that means the keywords that are in the job listing reflected in the application materials. And these STAR stories defined by situation, task, action, and result. And so we're going to get a chance to practice all of this. So using keywords to reflect a job posting, when a hiring manager, I've had experience with this, Diana's had experience with this, looks at materials, those keywords really stand out to us. And the more that they're authentically reflected in the job listing, the more we already know this person has put a lot of effort into understanding and catering their applications towards this position. We're not a generic receiver of that application. This person cares. We can see the effort that's been put into it. It also induces a sense of familiarity. And, if I see something like that, they're probably going to go to the top of my, review and detail list. Is there anything else you want to say about that in particular?
That captures it.
Okay. Then actually listing these things in the application materials, a great way is to use this acronym: situation, task, action, result. So a situation is, there was a situation at your previous employment, a task needed to be done, the action that you took, and the result. It's a little mini story. Now, in general, situation and task can really help give context to what you've done, but because they take up space, these components might be reserved for an interview. And so on a CV or resume where space is limited, you can focus on action and results. And you can use action verbs to highlight those actions, to be specific as possible, and then focus on using concrete or quantitative results as much as possible. And then you can use visual hierarchy to make everything easy to scan. Now, one last general strategy before we start getting specific is that if you think about your experience, or your client thinks about their experience, and they feel like it doesn't really match all of the qualifications for the job description, and this is where you can help your client think about their transferable skills. So consider a job posting might ask something like, they want an ideal candidate to have 5+ years in project management, managing a team and multiple deadlines. Okay, so who here has this experience right now? Okay, I guarantee you that you all have this experience, because you have to manage the multiple projects of your theses, your research, your class. You have to get in touch with your advisors and your collaborators. You have to juggle multiple deadlines, and you absolutely do this. And so your experience of initiating communication with multiple people and managing multiple research projects and deadlines is what project management is. So really looking at what these job descriptions are and saying, what does that mean? What's it part of? You can then say, yes, I do have this experience by doing these things. And so helping yourself or your client identify these, you'll likely find that you have a significant amount of match for an application that you're interested in, even if it doesn't seem that way right at the beginning. Okay, so now let's get into CVs and resumes specifically before getting into cover letters. So in your activity packet, can you all please find this page, typical resume and CV expectations? Okay. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Know that this is a resource for you to reference for these typical expectations that you're going to see as we go through some authentic examples. One of the main things I want to add is that, a resume typically isn't longer than 2 pages. It's a little different for a CV, though a CV still isn't everything you've ever done. Okay, so now let's start with an authentic example. You also all have this in your activity packet. This is an authentic example of a job listing that someone applied for. Now, let's say a client comes in and says, this is the job that I'm applying for. You, as a coach, can help them identify what are the most important aspects of this job listing that you're going to be looking for to help them develop their qualified match and personal brand. So upon first scan, what are some of the keywords that stand out to you? Yes.
CFD.
Computational fluid dynamics. What else? Yes.
Bathroom reactor with the price for space.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What else? So here, yes, one more.
This is maybe specific because like I'm in nuclear, but I see this, that it's a sodium cooled reactor. I'm thinking this is probably like government or military alliance specifically because of that. So I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, that is a good observation. And this actually is, and you'll see how that gets reflected. So I've highlighted just some of the key words that jumped out at me so that when I'm looking at a client's CV, resume, and cover letter, I'm looking for these words. That could be on paper. If they're showing it to me digitally, sometimes I just Control F in one and then look for it in their digital materials. But I'm specifically looking, are these words reflected in their application? So here is now the application for this particular position. So please note this is confidential. Don't spread it without explicit consent. But as you are looking at this as a coach, what are those keywords that stand out to you here that you see reflected from the job listing? Yes.
Model development.
Just shout them out.
Yeah.
Yep, CFD. How about one more?
US DOE and nuclear reactor technology.
Yeah. So here is me. This is just comparing with the job listing. And so this applicant has already done a great job of taking what was expected of them and then using those words or variations of them to make them easily identifiable to the review committee. So looking at this application and that this client might be working to develop a personal brand to communicate their qualified match, what could be this client's personal brand? So if you were on the review committee and then discussing this resume with your peers, you'd say, oh yeah, we like the applicant who, what would be your one sentence summary? Just scanning this quickly. Yes.
I is with experiencing CFD modeling of the transfer of the reactors.
Yeah. I mean, whatever your experience, whatever stands out to you is the right answer. As in, there is no wrong answer. But an applicant who really wants to have that one thing remembered will do well to have you ask you, or you can offer, this is what I take away from this. Is this what you want them to remember about you? And if yes, great. If not, you can help make what they do want remembered stand out. Would anyone have said something different? So someone also previously said that they have both research and industry experience. They have policy experience. And so when thinking about a personal brand, if a hiring committee is going to be thinking or remembering this, then what makes them unique? What makes this, nuclear engineer unique from another nuclear engineer, or this nuclear CFD modeler unique from another nuclear CFD modeler? And if it's not clear to you as a coach, then that's the opportunity for you to start asking questions about really what makes you a unique qualified match so that you are memorable. This resume lists all sorts of actions that this applicant has done. What are some of the actions that you see? What stands out to you? The first thing is that your eyes catch. What other actions did this client take? Or what have they done? Yeah.
Like developing stuff and designing experiments.
One more? Yeah. And so based on what you said, what you described were some of the very first words in these bullet points. They quantified, they developed. These first words are action verbs, and they communicate what this client, or sorry, what this applicant has done in a way that is very, people can envision it. We can envision what it means to develop something, to perform something. It's not passive, it's active. And these are typically the first words of every bullet point. You also, in your activity packet, is a list of potential action verbs that you can reference when thinking about your own application materials or helping your client. There are different databases out there with similar words. This one is from MIT. So this is something that you can reference when coaching each other later.
It's just also page 31.
Thank you. So we've looked at the action verbs that this client has started to communicate their experience with. And the question is, what did they do specifically that a review committee or a hiring committee could remember? So again, as a coach, scanning this authentically, what are the specific actions that this applicant has taken? What have they done specifically? As you're reading this, just what stands out to you? Yes.
I noticed that they already developed a thermohydraulics model that had like a specific application for a specific kind of reactor at a low. And so I'm imagining that they could probably do the same sort of skills for this reactor.
Yeah, thank you. How about one more? What catches your eye? Like if you were to communicate to your client, oh yeah, I see you did this specifically. I see you did this specifically. What stands out?
A very good communicator.
Yeah. So the two things that I heard you say are really highlighted by, they led, that was an action verb, but what makes you think they're a good communicator? Because they led a team of interns. They made it specific, or they developed this specific model. And so the more specific that can be, the more memorable it is and communicates to the hiring committee that we understand what this applicant did, we understand what their strengths were, and we can see how it maps onto our particular needs. And then finally, what was the impact of some of their work? What do you see here that shows what the results were of their actions, the so what? If you're looking for this as a coach in here, what stands out? Yes.
Phrases that start with to.
Yep. And I did this thing in order to, to advanced current modeling, to understand flow effects, to understand erosion, to measure differential nuclear, cross-section values, ultimately the so what. So all of these are, here's this thing that I did, that was the action, here's the result, action, result, action, result. And this is what you as a coach will be looking for to really help an applicant's experience stand out and be specific. Notice there isn't a lot of, here was this problem and here's what needed to be, happen, because there isn't room for that. But coming up with that is going to be useful for when there's an interview or even introducing those components into the cover letter. Okay, so given this particular application, what don't you notice here? What don't you see? Like there aren't any specific benchmarks or numbers. As a discussion, how might you help this client identify more concrete and more quantitative results? So recalling our coaching process of making an observation, this is what I notice, sharing your direct experience through direct feedback. My experience reading this is asking some sort of open-ended question to help understand what the client wants, and then exploring solutions by proposing a solution or asking a question. Yes.
I can just in the last team of interns develop, and I would ask, what you want to communicate? That you want to say that you're good at managing large teams, or you want to communicate that you're good at getting people and inspiring the coding of people? So you might want to ask how many interns?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
How much do you just streamline that to like speed up the process? Something like that.
Yeah, right. It's a genuine question that you have that then can motivate a genuine question to the client. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to from the content to how easy it is to actually scan this resume. So the first thing that you'll see is the big, bold, capital positions of each experience. What is your eye naturally drawn to next? The role itself. It's also bold, but it's not capital. Now it's Camelback. And then what is your eye drawn to next? The bullet points. Yeah. And then If people want, they can look at where the locations were and what the years were, but ultimately we're using visual hierarchy to say bigger, bolder, top left is going to be the first thing that our eyes notice. And then it gets progressively smaller, lighter fonts indented in, and that's going to control where a reader is going to scan. And even if a reader were to blur their eyes and just look at all the text, which is here, a lot of overwhelmed to be all highlighted, you can still see there's a structure and there's still white space in between that makes it possible to see these are chunks of information and this is how it flows. Now I want to show you the actual resume here, which includes the skills part in the bottom. And some clients might ask, should I include these skills? Should I not include these skills? What's actually relevant? And that question is, it depends. What do they want to convey about themselves that makes them memorable? In this case, some of the skills, additional technical skills like Python, MATLAB, the specific software Flownext SE, but their interest in activities is they're also into music composition. And so that now adds a memorable, unique trait about this person, that they are a nuclear engineer who has industry and research experience, and is also a music composer. And that kind of creativity could be really useful for a particular position. They also hold US security clearance. So good catch there, because that can take a long time to go through. And so this is a pro, they can start quicker. Okay. So at this point, we are going to pair up and you are going to help your partner optimize their CV or resume for the job listing that they brought in. So let me tell you specifically what you're going to do, and then we'll start the exercise. So you're going to start by exchanging job descriptions and CVs and resumes. For the actual coaching, you're going to go through the coaching checklist, which is also in your packet. And you're going to start with the introduction and the orientation. You'll spend about 3 minutes reviewing while your client, in this case, does some kind of quiet activity. And as you're reviewing it, you're going to be looking for what keywords can you identify in the listing and in their CV or resume. And then during the actual coaching, the question is, how can you help them develop or improve their personal brand and their STAR answers, focusing on action, result. We'll have a debrief where I'll ask coaches to volunteer. Given that experience, what can you remember about your client's personal brand? What stood out? And then we'll switch. So you have this coaching checklist from training 1 in your packet. This is for you to reference. And I want to specifically focus on this orientation section right here, because there is something that is new that is here. The questions of what tools have you used, any guidelines or reference materials, now in parentheses is or Gen AI. So we don't have a specific policy yet for how coaches should or shouldn't talk about Gen AI, but what we do know is that hiring managers are seeing an increase in applications with qualities that suggest the use of Gen AI, which is that the application is vague, it's wordy, and either the materials don't match each other or they don't match the interview. And there was a recent survey at MIT with almost 700 participants that showed 50% said that they do use Gen AI for professional projects, including emails, recommendation letters, and application materials. So this is a commonly used tool for this. You can see the entire presentation of results at this website with this passcode. And I also want to say there's been a study that shows peer reviewers, when they've thought that something that they're reviewing has been written or somehow generated with Gen AI, that the feedback that they gave was in general shorter. And it was more cautious. It was more careful and indirect, kind of to soften the suggestions and give more praise and kind of more elusive because they were tiptoeing around whether or not Gen AI was used. So you may or may not find yourself doing this, but if you find yourself kind of changing how you might be giving advice or just feeling uncomfortable, if you maybe suspect the use of Gen AI or feel uncomfortable talking about it, it's important for us to know what experiences you have and for you to feel supported. So please do talk with your manager.
So overall, if a client comes to us and we're like reading through, let's say, their CV and you think like, this seems like this was used with like, they use ChatGPT or something. Is that something that we should like address and be like, hey, this reads like you use ChatGPT? And then do you have any like recommendations, like, how to kind of address that with the client?
So we don't yet have specific recommendations. I think in general, if I were to show you my application and you said, did you use ChatGPT for this? I would probably feel defensive, either because I did and I wasn't supposed to, or maybe I didn't. I'm like, wow, is it bad? So it could be useful in that orientation part. If do you want to talk about it and you feel comfortable just saying, what's this part of your process and having it be very non-judgmental, something that you asked before, not after. But ultimately, if an application is vague, if an application isn't specific enough, then it almost doesn't matter why, right? You can say, oh, this is really vague. This isn't really memorable to me. Can you tell me more, about this? And it could be that if someone has generated something extensively with Gen AI, then maybe they haven't really thought about what is in there, in which case they might have difficulty answering, or maybe they just have difficulty answering because they've never really been asked that question before. So ultimately, you want to make their application help them be aware that an effective and competitive application is going to, really have these keywords. It's going to be specific. It's going to have these concrete results, and it's going to be unique. And that's really challenging to generate with Gen AI. Anything else to say about that?
The only thing I would emphasize is that I think if you feel nervous about potentially sounding accusatory, like the use generative AI for this, I think just be as specific as possible about the traits that you are noticing, rather than assuming the method that generated those traits. So say, I'm really noticing you could be more quantitative with your results, or some of the explanations of the technical work feel maybe too high level and could get a little bit more technical. And I think that it may then incidentally come up that, oh yeah, ChatGPT was really having a hard time understanding my description of my internship. Then that comes up organically, but it wasn't something words that you put in their mouth, and you can still address the specifics that you're noticing.
Yeah. So for the purpose of our exercise today, this is not somewhere that you need to spend time, but just want to introduce that as a place where that could happen if you feel comfortable, because it's becoming more common. So in exercise today, you will spend some time reviewing your applicant's materials, looking for those keywords. You'll suggest a quiet time activity, and there is a quiet time activity bank for you in your Dropbox. There are some specific ones for career communications in your activity packet that you can reference. You'll prioritize what you want to talk to them about. I've given you the priority today, which is to help them develop their personal brand and their star stories, focusing on action and result. And then the actual coaching. So you'll practice really going through this. I noticed, my experience is, what is it that you want? How can we figure this out together? And I encourage you to start your sentences with these words. And it might feel pedantic, but eventually I want you to kind of roll your eyes when I bring this up, because you already do it. But what we found is that we used to talk about this primarily just in the training on coaching, and found that without this explicit reminder, we kind of go back into our default of, oh, here's something that you could do better, or here's something that you can do. And so really wanting to emphasize the coaching process in this exercise and future exercises. So here it is on this checklist that you can use. You'll also have this coaching guide that's a summary of today's workshop that you can reference also in your activity packet. Okay, so for this coaching exercise, you have been partnered either next to someone who's already in your department or someone who is not, if there is not, but essentially partners this way. So let's have the partner who's closest to me in this line be the coach first. So your client, please get your job listing and your materials out to hand to your coach, and then we will start our exercise. Any questions about this before we get started? Okay, so let's come back together. So coaches, how did that go? I'd love to hear, based on that experience, what you remember about your client's personal brand. The, one sentence summary of them that makes them unique. What do folks remember?
PhD in nuclear engineering with a solid background in teaching and mentorship.
Yeah.
That has worked in the topic area of the job listing, but not necessarily the same methods, but is confident in transferability.
Yeah, great. I want the person who, has confidence in learning this new thing. Look at all this other experience that they have. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so go ahead and switch. And you've got 10 minutes. All right, so wrap up these conversations, please. Let's come back together. All right, coaches, what do you remember about your client's personal brand? What's the one sentence summary of them? Yes.
I would say that my client is someone who very clearly has the technical experience in the relevant area for the job posting, and seems like they have like industry and soft skill experience, especially having been a co-founder of a startup organization, which also aligns with what ePosting seems to be looking for.
Yeah, right. Very memorable. Thank
For
you.
reference, this is a fictional resume. I have not thought it.
Own it. Own it. How about one more? Yes.
Yeah, you guys looking at teaching focused positions, and has a ton of experience in sort of all aspects of teaching, which is really cool. The mentorship and course design and actual delivery content. So that seems like it's really well rounded in that respect.
Thanks. Yeah, it's one thing to want to teach, and it's another thing to say, this is what I've actually done. Now, in some cases, depending on the position that you're applying for, you may see a resume that really has your personal brand up front. There's an about me that is, here's the one thing that I want you to remember. It's like the title of a poster or a talk, and then everything else supports it. I've also seen that in CVs as well. Anything that's come up for you this round? Any questions that you have about coaching each other now, or that you might think about for the future? Okay. Then I want to just make a quick note that you might see some interesting types of resume templates. Oftentimes, people who don't know where to start and they want an online service to do it for them, they want something pretty, they might find some things that look like this. So what is your reaction to, say, the one on the left? Yeah. Now, for something like an academic position or an industry position, your reaction is probably representative of what someone on the hiring committee might think. If this was for design or something else, they might have a different reaction, right? It's dependent on the position. Now, the one on the right, which is less fancy, more standard, there's the name, there's some bullet points about them, there's some positions, and that follows more that standard format. There's still this 2-column format on the right, which might be easy to scan, but for people who are applying to positions that require an algorithmic scan, like a pre-processing, those don't tend to be able to read this 2-column format. So asking your client, who are they applying to? Is there possibly a chance of, an algorithm? Then having that, single column is going to provide the best chance that everything that they see will actually get recognized. And for federal positions, oftentimes that algorithmic scan is looking for some number of those keywords that were in the job description before a human ever lays eyes on it. So you want to make sure that it actually gets recognized. Okay. Any questions about that before we move on to cover letters?
All right, let's come back together. We'll move on to cover letters now. So it's a truism with cover letters that it's being read at the same time as your CV and resume. But at the same time, you've probably also heard people say, does anyone actually read the cover letter? Is it just a formality? And the advice that we usually give here is whether it's read with any intention is going to depend highly on the type of organization that's being applied to. So you can think about the spectrum that Jack showed earlier in the training with startup at one end, large organization at the other end. So if you think about a very small, tight-knit team with a culture that's developing versus a large organization that has more accepted types of roles, which type of organization do you think is more likely to read a cover letter with a lot of attention to detail? The small organization or the big organization? The small organization, yeah. So that's a general kind of rule of thumb that you can think about. But at the same time, as we've said throughout, individualization really helps your application become memorable. It certainly can't help if people invest effort in making their cover letter feel more personal. So in brief, the CV resume is about you. It's more cut and dry, as we said before. The cover letter is about that overlap. It's about you and the organization. It's not a straight up summary of your CV. It can elaborate on details. And so you can think about combining highlights of your CV or resume with highlights of the organization to create a narrative about that qualified match piece. And you also have to think about, as Jack and I just said, that people are going to be reading these in different combinations. So it's fine if they feel a little bit redundant. They should just be amplifying slightly different parts of information about your career journey. Jack, could you make sure the door is just cracked, please? Thank you. We have another summary here of different cover letter expectations. And this is where the first point at which we're going to start introducing a lot about academic applications. So I'm not going to go into detail about each of these, but I'll give you a minute to quietly read over the bullet points and compare some of the differences. So the way I'll summarize the difference between a more standard industry or government cover letter versus an academic cover letter is that the academic cover letter is a lot more substantive because you are proposing a far more substantive career track. You're proposing that you will launch something new for your target institution versus fitting into an existing team. So there's a lot more talking about where are you going in the future? How are you going to fit into the community in a way that supports that? Any questions about this comparison? Let us return to our nuclear engineering job candidate. So again, in your packet, you can see their cover letter. And we're going to return to the key concepts of keywords, action words, specific actions, and concrete results. And I'd like to ask you to read through the cover letter here and see what stands out, especially in comparison to the resume that Jack broke down in detail earlier. I'm first going to pop up some highlighting just to really emphasize how they are reiterating the important keywords from the job description. I'm also going to ask, though, so we highlighted in green some things that didn't actually appear as highlighted in the resume. What do you think made them want to include star CCM, for example? Because we did already discuss that it would have been helpful for them to quantify the intern team size. Why do you think they decided to highlight star CCM? Sophia?
Typically listed job description and they wanted someone with
Yeah.
that. They didn't have it in the bullet points of their resume, but they had it like skill sections.
Yeah.
Bring that forward.
Exactly. It was kind of hidden all the way at the bottom of the original resume. Ivan?
Yeah, I also noticed that like that whole paragraph is talking about design capstone course that is not listed in the resume.
Do you find that it, do you find that it changes your view of this person's candidacy?
Well, I think that like it looks better that like they were on this they're in a capstone course, that they like worked on a team, and that it was like, you know, it was a goal-oriented experience. But then it's not actually in the resume, and so I think it should also be like included as a bullet point, maybe under the master's student section.
Yeah, you wonder about how they, it would be interesting to talk to the original person and just ask them, you know, did you feel like you ran out of space and didn't want to make the resume too crowded, or how did they decide what to highlight in each piece? Sophia?
Also, I guess I'm not sure. So it seems like when they mention the capstone course, they mainly talk about like how many people they worked with, and they like designed and executed a prototype of a subsystem. They didn't really give a lot of like specifics. I'm wondering if maybe the capstone wasn't as related to the topic of the research, and is more like they're trying to show their people skills and like, you know, working on teams. But if they had a slightly different topic, maybe it would have felt out of place on the resume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be a more generic engineering project. Follow-up question from Ivan?
I guess this is more a comment on the
Sure.
like looking at this from like now a more technical, like nuclear engineering point of view, I noticed that like they have a lot of talk about their two-phase closures, which is not necessarily the same skill set that they would be using in this application. And so like I would recommend them to talk more about like the broad thermal hydraulics, rather than like this is a little bit more of like a theory type of aspect. And so like really elaborating on that, the capstone course, I think would like improve the like the fit with this job posting.
Yeah, so it sounds like there could be a potential trade-off with trying to be more technical and demonstrate their depth of knowledge about a previous project, while also acknowledging that it's not necessarily immediately relevant to the subject matter of the current job posting. Cool. Kevin?
Yeah, maybe like a question related to that. I feel like they're like a little bit banking on the fact that the person reading this is like really technically adept in this area.
Yeah.
And it would strike me that like if the person reading it was, I don't know, in a slightly different field, or like an HR person or something, like, or like me, like probably have no idea what the second paragraph means. So I wonder how you like make that decision of like, how confident are you that the person reading this is going to understand everything?
Yeah. It's interesting because this person is such a good match for the job posting that you imagine that within a small community of practice like nuclear engineering, it is likely that they had inside information about who might be reading their application, or at least the type of application process that the prospective employer was using. But I'm not sure if this was scrubbed just for anonymity, but if there was a name in the dear line, we might know more information about how specifically targeted the cover letter was. All right, keeping an eye on the time, let's move on to make sure you have time to do an exercise related to a cover letter. So I'd like for each coaching pair again to pull out the example job listing that you have. It's fine that if you only have one per pair. And the prompt here is going to be to draft 3 to 5 bullet points for a cover letter that you might use for this example job listing. And the prompts to consider are, based on the job listing, what are the top 3 experiences you would highlight from your CV or resume? Consider using situation and task. And how do you imagine having impact on this organization and its projects based on your experiences? How do you imagine this position helping you grow in major skills or skill areas or aspirations? So having something a little bit prospective. Okay. So for the next phase of this activity, I'm going to ask you to come together, and we're going to modify these instructions a little bit in the interest of time again. So what we'll do is we will take 7 minutes to compare the bullet points that you came up with, and each take a try at asking your partner a couple of coaching questions aimed at helping them develop personal brand and star type communications through the bullet points that you're drafting. So it's fine if you really only address one bullet point per person, for example. You're just going to apply that level of coaching attention to a few of those nuggets. All right, go ahead and start sharing your bullet points, please. All right. Let's come back together. Can I hear back from one group? I'd love to hear something that a partner appreciated about a strategy that their partner used, whether in coaching or in crafting bullet points for the cover letter. What was a strategy you saw that you liked? Ivan?
I think that this job posting, because like it is looking for a thought leader, is kind of looking for like it's looking for an ethos, I think. And I think that the cover letter that we were talking about provides a little bit of that ethos by talking about like I started this startup company and it's just like kind of going through the process, like taking the idea and like implementing it, which is what I think a lot of consulting is supposed to be about. And so I think that it does, like the cover letter would do a good job of establishing like this is why you should trust me and clients should trust me.
So being able to show leadership and creativity and trustworthiness. Great, thank you for sharing. Okay. Any final questions about cover letters before we move on? So our next topic is going to be faculty applications, and this is going to be a whirlwind. We know that a lot of why we do it this way is because we find it to be very patchy whether or not fellows ever get a single faculty applicant. So we're doing this kind of as a placeholder to let you know that expertise and resources on faculty application strategies and examples exist within the CommLabs. You do not have to be responsible for all of that today, but if you get interested in the faculty application route yourself, if you start getting clients who are headed for faculty positions, we want you to know the kind of overall approach to this and where you can find more resources. So whirlwind tour of faculty applications. There are a lot more components for faculty application jobs than for an industry job typically, and the components also vary by both field and school. At a baseline, you do have the familiar CV and cover letter, but there's also the research statement, teaching statement, multiple letters of reference, and what used to always be called the diversity statement, but now is mutating into new forms and taking on new titles like broader impact statement, community statement, service statement. So you can see how those are related, but not necessarily using the term of diversity. And in addition to those paper components, there are multiple in-person talks as well as one-on-one interviews with existing faculty members, sometimes also graduate students and postdocs. Some of the talks may be through video as well. And then additionally, depending on the field, there is a special type of talk whose name varies based on the field. Often chalk talk, even though it is often no longer with chalk, which is silly, or even just a closed door session. This usually happens in BE, Chemi, and NSE, maybe in AeroAstra and CEE, very, very rarely in EECS and MECI. So that's an additional form of specialized talk expertise. And we're going to return to the idea of personal brand, but the personal brand here is really big, as I alluded to earlier when we were talking about academic cover letters. So we say that it needs 5 components. Number 1, you are pointing that you're working towards a valuable vision. You're not just fulfilling the vision of the company or the organization itself. You are bringing your own vision of a world where your research will be driving a whole lab. You want to show that you are currently working on real challenging problems, so you have a track record of success. Your future proposals are feasible, so they're also going to make an impact in your field of choice. You have those demonstrable successes, and there's still that match element of being a good fit for the institution and its resources. The research and teaching statements are probably the most substantive written documents, especially the research statement. They share the traits of identifying knowledge or curriculum gaps and proposing or sharing realistic solutions. So very, very briefly, the research statement is really about demonstrating future potential for the most part. This is less the case in computer science, where it's more a statement of past research, but for most fields about saying, my best days are ahead. Here's what you can expect out of me as a researcher. There's a balance of novelty and risk, similar to in grant writing, where you want to say, this is new, but it's not so crazy that it's not going to work. And a helpful summary, a helpful strategy to consider is including an executive summary or research abstract, 1 paragraph to 1 page summary, because research proposals tend to be really long in many cases, and it can be hard for people outside of your immediate discipline to understand the research you're proposing. So imagine providing an abstract for a full department of people from very different backgrounds within your larger fields. On the teaching statement side, you're introducing your general philosophy for pedagogy. How do you teach and why? How do you assess how your students are doing? You're giving concrete examples of that philosophy in action, so it doesn't just sound fluffy. You are explaining how you would strengthen the curriculum via new and existing classes, which is another way of showing that you're familiar with what the school actually teaches. And there are plenty of examples on Dropbox, through the Career Office and the Teaching and Learning Lab, and through the full faculty training workshop from the Comm Lab, which is available in your training Dropbox, even though we don't actively teach it regularly anymore. So most of the departments also have even more extensive faculty application trainings on top of the 1 workshop training that exists from the shared CommFellow resources. Please ask your manager or poke around in the Dropbox if you're interested in seeing those. For example, most of the departments have a separate research statement workshop versus teaching statement workshop. And from our colleagues in career advising and professional development, they have effectively a year-long workshop and panel series called the Faculty Job Search Seminar. So basically any month of the year, if you go to their website, you can find they're probably running a panel or workshop relevant to the faculty application process. Finally, we do have a coaching guide for faculty applications if you like our 1-page at a glance resources. So that's a very quick introduction to existing resources about faculty apps. Any questions on the whirlwind? I am going to skip this final section on interviews, but the slides will be available in your Dropbox as usual if you want to read up on those. In our experience, people rarely come to the Comm Lab for help actually doing a mock interview. They usually go to CAPD for that. But if you are talking with someone, and especially if they're a repeat client who's working on any kind of application process, it is likely that they might ask some preparatory questions about the interviews, like what do you know what I should expect? What should I prepare for a technical interview versus a behavioral interview? So if you need support with any of those questions, ask your manager, or you can check out some of the tips in the slides that will be in your Dropbox. Zooming ahead here. I'm going to hold questions until afterwards so we don't hold people over the hour, but Jack and I can stay around for a few minutes afterwards. So to close out, I really want to acknowledge the multiple staff and fellows who have contributed to this training over the years, since it's a lot of aggregate expertise. And leave you with a reminder of upcoming events, particularly our op-eds workshop tomorrow, which still has capacity if you want to register. So please do use the QR code here if you want to register, and please do also just take 1 minute now if you can to leave feedback for Jack and me on today's workshop. Thank you all.